At a certain point in the evening, your body begins to send unmistakable signals. Your eyes grow heavy. Your thoughts become sluggish and repetitive. You yawn, stretching your jaw wide, and yet you don't move toward the bedroom. Instead, you scroll through one more video. You start another episode even though you barely remember what happened in the last one. You refresh the same websites you've already checked 3 times. The clock creeps past midnight. Then 1, sometimes 2 in the morning. And there you are, exhausted but awake, tired but resistant, caught in a strange war with your own need for rest. And naturally, when this happens night after night, you begin to feel something close to guilt. You think about all the articles you've read about sleep hygiene, about the importance of routine, about how screens destroy your circadian rhythm. You promise yourself that tomorrow will be different. Tomorrow you'll be disciplined. Tomorrow you'll go to bed at a reasonable hour. But when tomorrow's evening arrives, you find yourself doing the exact same thing, as if some invisible force compels you to stay awake just a little longer, to resist the closing of the day. Most people, when they examine this pattern, conclude they have a problem with discipline. They blame their phones, their lack of willpower, their addiction to entertainment. They download apps to limit screen time. They set alarms to remind them when to sleep. And sometimes these methods work for a few days, maybe even a week. But then, slowly, inexorably, they find themselves back in the same position, tired, awake, scrolling, resisting. But what if I told you that you're not staying up late because you lack discipline? What if this resistance to sleep has almost nothing to do with your screens or your habits, and everything to do with something much older and deeper in the human experience? You see, most of what we call bad habits are actually symptoms of something we don't want to look at directly. When someone drinks too much, they're not really craving alcohol. When someone overeats, they're not truly hungry for food. And when you stay up late scrolling through meaningless content, you're not actually interested in what you're looking at. You're postponing something. You're holding something at bay. And that something, if you look closely enough, is the ending of the day itself. This is what the German philosopher Martin Heidegger was pointing at when he spoke about our relationship with time and finitude. He observed that human beings have a peculiar relationship with endings. We are beings who exist toward death. Not in some morbid sense, but in the fundamental sense that we are always moving toward completion, toward closure, toward the end of things. And this awareness, usually unconscious, creates what he called a primordial anxiety. Not anxiety about any specific threat, but anxiety about existence itself, about the fact that things end, that time passes, that nothing lasts forever. Consider what sleep actually represents. When you go to sleep, you are participating in a small death. You are allowing consciousness to dissolve. You are surrendering control. You are letting the day end. And more than that, you are acknowledging that this particular day, with all its possibilities and moments, is now finished. It will never come again. When you wake up tomorrow, it will be a different day. This day is done. It's like when a child resists bedtime. The child isn't resisting sleep itself. The child is resisting the end of the party, the closing of the day's adventures, the separation from the warm living world. The child senses, correctly, that going to sleep means this day is over. And children, in their wisdom, want to keep the good things going. They haven't yet learned to pretend that endings don't matter. But as adults, we tell ourselves sophisticated stories. We say we're just finishing this one task, just checking this one thing. We don't admit, even to ourselves, that we're like that child pulling at their parent's sleeve, saying, "Not yet, not yet." We're standing at the threshold of sleep, at the doorway to ending, and we're refusing to cross it. We're trying to make the day last just a little longer. We're protesting against the fundamental structure of existence itself, that things end, that time passes, that we cannot hold on to anything forever. Let me give you an analogy. Imagine you're at the edge of a swimming pool, about to dive in. You know the water is cold. You know that crossing from air into water will be a shock to your system. You know that once you're in, you'll adjust, you'll be fine, you might even enjoy it. But there's that moment right before, when you're standing on the edge, when every cell in your body wants to delay. Just one more moment in the warm air, just one more breath before the plunge. You're not afraid of the water exactly. You're resistant to the transition itself, to the ending of being dry and the beginning of being wet. This is what's happening when you stay up late. Sleep is that cold water. It's the transition, the crossing, the small death and rebirth. And you're scrolling, you're video watching, your endless browsing, these are the ways you stand on the edge, delaying the plunge. You're not doing anything particularly pleasurable. If someone asked you in that moment if you were enjoying yourself, you'd probably say, no, you're tired, your eyes hurt. You know you'll regret this tomorrow. But you're not staying up because you're enjoying it. You're staying up because you don't want to cross the threshold into not being awake anymore. And this period, this resistance, can feel quite uncomfortable once you become aware of it. Because now you can't pretend it's about discipline, or screens, or habits. Now you have to face what it's actually about. Your relationship with endings, with time, with the passing nature of all things. And that's not a problem that can be solved with an app or a bedtime routine. The usual response is to try desperately to overcome it through sheer will. They set strict bedtimes and enforce them militarily. They remove all screens from their bedroom. They take melatonin and use sleep masks and play white noise. And sometimes these help, not because they solve the underlying issue, but because they provide a structure that makes the crossing a bit easier. But this doesn't address the deeper question. Because you can force yourself to lie down at 10 p.m., but you can't force yourself to let go of the day. The resistance persists because the thing you're resisting persists. The ending of the day, the closing of possibilities, the small death that sleep represents. Let me tell you about someone I knew who went through this realization. He was a successful architect who could design buildings down to the smallest detail, who could manage complex projects with hundreds of moving parts. But every night, he found himself staying up until 2 or 3 in the morning, exhausted but unable to stop reading articles about architecture, looking at other people's designs, scrolling through image after image of buildings he would never construct. He tried everything. Nothing worked consistently. Then, one evening, sitting at his desk at midnight, tired but scrolling, something shifted. He stopped and actually looked at what he was feeling. Not the tiredness, not the guilt, but underneath that, what was he feeling? And he recognized it, a kind of low-level grief. The day was ending. Another day in which he had moved through his routines, checked his boxes, completed his tasks, but in which he hadn't really lived. Not in some grand dramatic sense, but in the sense of being fully present, fully alive, fully there. And by staying awake, he was trying to give himself more time, one more chance, one more opportunity to actually inhabit his life before the day closed. But of course, that extra time spent scrolling wasn't giving him what he sought. He wasn't becoming more present by staying awake. He was just delaying the inevitable. And he realized something else. His work had become a kind of sleepwalking. He moved through his days efficiently, competently, successfully, but not really there. And at night, his psyche was trying to make up for this absence by refusing to let the day end, as if more time could somehow compensate for the lack of presence during the time he'd already had. He didn't suddenly transform after this recognition, but something did shift. He began to notice during his days when he was going through motions versus when he was actually present. And he noticed that the nights when he felt most resistant to sleep were the days when he had been most absent from his own life. The staying up late wasn't a bad habit. It was a message. And this is where we arrive at something difficult to articulate but crucial to understand. When you stop resisting the end of the day, when you allow sleep to come without fighting it, you're not just developing better sleep habits. You're changing your relationship with finitude itself. You're accepting that days end, that moments pass, that you cannot hold on to anything, that life is not an infinite resource to be managed and optimized, but a finite gift that is constantly slipping through your fingers, whether you acknowledge it or not. This acceptance doesn't feel like what people imagine. It's not peaceful in some soft, comfortable way. It's more like a kind of intensity, a heightening of presence, because when you really accept that this day will end, that this moment will pass, that you will die, then suddenly this day, this moment, this life becomes almost unbearably precious. Not in a way that makes you grasp at it, but in a way that makes you show up for it. So what do you do with this understanding? What changes when you see that your late nights aren't about discipline but about your relationship with endings, with time, with mortality itself? First, you stop trying to force yourself to sleep through willpower alone. Not because discipline isn't valuable, but because you recognize that the resistance isn't happening at the level where discipline operates. You can't discipline yourself into accepting mortality. These require a shift in being, a fundamental reorientation to existence itself. In the meantime, you do the simple things. You notice when you're resisting sleep. You notice what it feels like in your body, that tension, that holding, that not yet. You don't judge it. You don't try to fix it. You just see it clearly. This is me resisting the ending of the day. This is me trying to make time last longer. This is me uncomfortable with finitude. And you ask yourself, honestly, was I present today? Did I actually live the hours I was given? Or did I sleepwalk through them? Because if you sleepwalked through them, then, of course, you're resistant to sleep now. Your being knows you didn't really live yet. So you're trying to live now, at midnight, through the thin medium of screens and scrolling. But you can't live that way. Presence doesn't work like that. The practice becomes not about fixing your sleep schedule, but about inhabiting your days. When you're eating, actually eat. When you're working, actually work. When you're with someone, actually be with them. Not perfectly. Not all the time. But enough that when evening comes, you've actually lived. And when you've been there during the day, the ending of the day doesn't feel like something to resist. It feels like a natural completion. And most importantly, you stop comparing yourself to people who seem to sleep easily. Because they either haven't woken up to the question of finitude yet, or they've found their own way of avoiding it, or they've worked through it. Your resistance isn't a sign of failure. It's a sign that you're confronting something real, something essential. You're wrestling with time itself. You're coming face to face with the fact of your own mortality. You also stop trying to recover some imagined past when sleep was easy. Maybe that time never existed. Or maybe it existed when you were less conscious, less aware. But you can't go back to unconsciousness once you've woken up to the question. You can only go forward, through the anxiety, through the resistance, into some new relationship with time and endings. Paradoxically, it's only when you stop trying to overcome the resistance, when you stop seeing it as a problem to be solved, that something begins to shift. Because the resistance itself is a form of resistance to reality. You're resisting sleep, because sleep represents ending. But then you're resisting the resistance. It's resistance piled on resistance. And at some point, you have to just stop. You have to stop fighting yourself. You have to let the day end, let sleep come, let things be as they are. Perhaps the reason you're staying up late is not that you lack discipline, but that you've outgrown the unconscious way of moving through time that most people maintain. You've become aware, even if dimly, of the preciousness and brevity of existence, and that awareness is uncomfortable. It makes sleep feel like surrender. It makes endings feel like small deaths, because they are. Every day that ends is gone forever. Every moment that passes will never return. But here's what you might not yet see. This awareness, this discomfort, this resistance, it's not the problem. It's the doorway. It's the crack in your unconsciousness through which reality is trying to break in. And once reality breaks in fully, once you stop resisting the resistance, once you let endings be endings and days be days and sleep be sleep, then something extraordinary happens. Not extraordinary in the sense of mystical experiences or sudden enlightenment. Extraordinary in the sense of ordinary life becoming vivid, real, precious, because you're finally present for it. You're thrown back on the only thing you actually have. This moment, this day, this finite span of awareness you call your life. And it's not nothing. It's everything. It's all there is. You've always had it. You just forgot for a while that it ends. And in forgetting that it ends, you forgot that it's happening now. So when night comes and you feel that familiar resistance to sleep, that urge to stay up just a little longer, you can recognize it for what it is. Listen to it. But don't obey it by staying up late. Obey it by living more fully during the day. Let the day end. Close your eyes. Cross the threshold. The day is finished. And that's not tragedy. That's just truth.